I'm sure your house. SN1, summer 2006, seemingly out of nowhere, New Century Financial, the country's second largest subprime only originator, has a pressing need for cash. Having made 51.6 billion worth of subprime loans in 2005, it is discovering that too many of its loans are going sour way too fast. Particularly troubling, early payment defaults are speaking. Those are loans where the borrowers are in default practically from the moment they agree to the loan. Early payment defaults can often trigger repurchase requests from investors, requiring the lender to buy them back. That is happening to New Century. In 2004, it repurchased 136.7 million worth of bad loans. In 2006, that number rose to 332.1 million. By June 4 of 2006, it has been forced to repurchase an additional 315.7 million in defaulted loans. Worse, one of New Century's strict and true techniques for recirculating its repurchase loans is no longer working. In previous year, after viewing defaulted mortgage out of securitization, it would simply stick them into a no sale, according to one close observer. This worked because New Century's loans volume was growing so rapidly that the bad mortgage could be buried as a small part of a big new sale. But by 2006, volume is starting to slow. New Century's perpetual motion machine is grinding to a halt. Meanwhile, New Century is running low on cash. On August 17, CFO Patty Dodge sends an email to Brad Morris, the CEO. We started the quarter with 400 in liquidity, and we are down to less than 15 today, she writes. In explaining the problem to the company's board, Morris cites continued default secondary market condition lending to warehouse line margin calls, higher investor kick-outs, and loans repurchase. Internally, top management began receiving a weekly report monitoring its problems. It is entitled Storm Watch. Does Wall Street know about New Century's problems? Of course it does. One Wall Street bankers tell New Century that its problems aren't all that unusual, according to a report done later by a bankruptcy examiner. There are, the examiner will write, dramatic industry-wide increases in early payment defaults and lower originator volumes. Amazingly, Wall Street is still willing to extend a lifeline to New Century. The company raises 134.5 million in the second half of 2006. Yet inventors are largely left in the dark. New Century doesn't disclose either the big increase in early payment defaults on the staggering 545 million backlog of repurchase claims. SN2 Fall 2006 Larry Litton is a mortgage servicer. In 1980 to 88, he and his father, Larry Litton Sr., founded Linton Loan Servicing, building into one of the nation's largest mortgage services. Inevitably, they service a lot of mortgages for subprime originators, including Bill Dallas, Ownit, and WMC, which was founded by Amy Brandt and which GE Capital bought in 2004. The two combined are cracking out more than 14 billion worth of loans a year. Litton also noticed that early payment defaults are soaring. The mortgage originators are freaking out and blaming him. The WMC guys are saying, "You suck," Litton recalls. He remembers thinking, maybe we're doing something wrong. So Linton comes up with that he recalls an ultra-aggressive move and delivering welcome pages to new homeowners, so there will be no confusion over where the mortgage checks should be mailed. But when the Litton employees arrive at the newly purchased homes, they discover something truly startling. My people came back and say 30% of the houses are vacant, Litton recalls. In other words, borrowers who closed on mortgage had so little means to make even the first payment that they never bothered to move in. Litton calls Amy Brandt at WMC. It's kinda hard to collect payment when someone ain't there. You might want to take a look at it, he tells her. SN3 December 11, 2006 Mid-morning, an auditorium at the office of Thrive Management. Leo Ranieri, yes, that Leo Ranieri is giving a speech. His tone of voice may be mild, but his words convey something else entirely: anger, dismay, worry. The occasion is an all-day housing symposium the ODS is putting on. The room is filled with bank regulators, housing lobbyists, economists, community activists, and members of the Supreme Mortgage Establishment. Sheila Bair, the new chairman of the FDIC, is there. So is David Berson, the chief economist at Fannie Mae, and John Taylor, the longtime Supreme critic from the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. Hank Paulson makes the welcoming remarks. Congressman Barney Frank gives the luncheon speech. The main topic is the Supreme business, which now accounts for around a quarter of the nation's mortgage, but which is clearly slumping. Ranieri is on a panel with Berson from Fannie Mae, a banker representing the Mortgage Banker Association, and the deputy comptroller of the currency. Their presentations are full of the one hand, On the other hand, equivocations. There is general agreement that subprime mortgages are here to stay. A panel devoted to subprime fraud focuses entirely on borrower fraud. Incredible, not a single word is mentioned about the widespread fraud being perpetrated by the companies themselves. Ranieri, however, has a much dimmer view of the state of the subprime mortgage industry than most others speaking today. Over the past few years, he has become horrified by what has happened to the mortgage-backed securities business he helped invent in a more innocent time. The lack of proper underwriting, Wall Street's unending desire for poor quality loans, the way triple B tranches are being repackaged into new triple A securities. This is not what Ranieri envisioned when he and Larry Fink and others were stirring up the market. He had always just assumed that the vast majority of loans in securitization will be good loans, not bad ones. Why would inventors want to buy bad loans? The fact that no one seems to care anymore is shocking to him. And that's what he tells this roomful of supreme experts bluntly and forcefully. The men who spent much of the 1980s trying unsuccessfully to minimize Fannie and Freddie's role in the securitization business now laments the way they have been rendered irrelevant by the supreme securitizers. He can see now what an important and useful role they played. They were, he says, the gatekeepers, forcing mortgage companies to adhere to their underwriting standards. If a mortgage originator didn't follow Fannie and Freddie's underwriting standards, nobody would buy them, says Ranieri. That standard has completely gotten pushed aside. Who now can keep the market in check? The rating agencies? Hardly. Government regulators? A joke. The private mortgage-backed securities market, says Ranieri, is unchecked by today's regulatory framework. He bemoans the layering of risks in subprime mortgage. He sneers at the praise affordability products, the industry's euphemism for subprime mortgage. He dwells at length on the rise of CDOs as a major distribution mechanism and laments their bewildering complexity. It is nearly impossible, he says, for inventors to understand what they are doing, and he makes a crucial point that Wall Street itself has largely missed. The CDO business has become a kind of daisy chain. Who is buying the subordinate tranches? He asked. Who is taking all that risk? The answer in many cases is nobody, no person. It is a thing, another CDO. Imagine taking the support trenches of the CDO and putting it in another CDO, further diluting the information flow. Does the buyer really understand the Reich's entitled? They buy senior trenches, I know. I buy senior trenches, but I like senior trencher to remind senior trenches. I like triple A to remind triple A. The poor level of disclosure in CDO prospectuses, Ranieri says, makes the rights level neither readily apparent nor easily quantifiable. You can hear the anger in his voice. This is a private securities market, he says evenly. It gets sold to the public. It gets sold to foreign inventors who, I will tell you, don't have a clue. It is supposed to be equal information that is available to all. When Ranieri finishes, an audience member asks a simple question. What do you see as the less than rosy scenario when the mortgage market goes into the toilet? I don't understand what the triple effects will be, he replies. A short of people are holding risks that will be hard to track down, and in some cases, they wouldn't even know they are holding the risk. Scene 4. Same place, same morning. Finally, Josh Rosner thinks to himself as the listens to Ranieri. Someone is calling it as it is. Rosner is the skeptical analyst who back in 2001 wrote the prescient paper. A home without equity is just a rental with debt. In May 2005, his sources at the Fed start telling him that rates are going to rise significantly in no small part to cure the excess speculation in housing. He is on warning clients that the housing market has peaked. In recent years, Rosner has continued to dig into the numbers underlying the housing boom. It is apparent, he says, that we've bumped up against the law of large number in home ownership. At the end of 2000, the official home ownership figure stood at 67.4%. 4 years later, with the spring bubble well underway, the home ownership rate is 69%. That is as high as it will ever go. For all of that craziness, not just the bad loans themselves, but the devastated neighborhoods, the people thrown out of their homes, the huge build-up of debt on both Main Street and Wall Street for a gain of 1.6%. It is really worth it. To Rosner, the answer is clear: no. His data shows that most of the frenzy hasn't even been about purchasing a place to live. Rosner's eureka moment comes when he sees data showing that about 36% of the mortgage used to purchase homes in 2004 and 2005 are not of primary residences, but for second homes and investment properties. And as he has been saying for years, the number of people borrowing to buy an actual home is dwarfed by the number of people borrowing to refinance. The refis, in turn, are made possible by raising home values, which may not even be real, given all the inflated appraisals. Like Ranieri, Rosner has become worried about the CDO market. Around the same time as Ranieri's speech, Rosner approaches a finance professor at Drexel University, Joseph Mason, to co-author a paper with him. SN 5, February 7, 2007. New Century files what's called an UK, a document that conveys important news that can't wait until the next quarter's results. The headline is stark. New Century Financial Corporation to restate financial statements for the quarters ended March 31, June 30, and September 30, 2006. Part of the reason for the restatement, the company says, is to correct errors in the way it has accounted for its many repurchase requests. The stock, which had hit its high of 51.32 just a few months earlier, plunged 36% in one day. By March, the company admits that it is unable to file any financial reports. By then, its repurchase claims have risen to a staggering 8.4 billion. The stock falls to about $1. By April, New Century is bankrupt. Never once during the entire housing bubble did the company report a quarterly loss before filing for a bankruptcy. By the end of 2006, anyone could have found his or her own data points to know that the supreme market was in trouble. The clues were everywhere. The staggering rise in home appreciation, which in some parts of the country had averaged 10 to 15% a year, was slowing down. In places like Arizona, California, Florida, the states where the housing bubble had been most pronounced, housing prices were already declining. Supreme borrowers with option ARMs, the ones who were counting on an increase in their home equity to refinance, were suddenly out of luck, with their homes no longer increasing in value. They had no way to refinance. Foreclosures were nearly double what they had been 3 years earlier. Delinquencies up, delinquencies up, started income loan defaults up, and of course those early payment defaults, the ones that signaled just how reckless the supreme originator had become, were way up. Supreme originator had created the condition for the perfect storm, said Tom Taylor at that OTS housing symposium. Sheila Bair, who had been sworn in as the new chair of the FDIC that summer was shocked to discover how far underwriting understand had fallen in the 4 years since she left the government. Back in 2002, when she had been Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Financial Institutions, there had been problems with predatory lending, for sure, but nothing like this, nothing even close. One of the first things Bayer did upon taking office was order of a database that included every securitized supreme mortgage. It was immediately obvious when she looked at it that there was going to be a massive problem when the ARMs reset. Meanwhile, a risk manager at one of the big Wall Street firms started noticing something unprecedented. People were walking away from their homes. Historically, the risk manager said people stopped paying their credit cards first, then their cars, and only then their homes. This time people with 1,500 cars and 300 3,100 merchants would get in their cars and drive away from their homes. The newspaper offered further evidence for the looming problems. Although the fall, the business press wrote article after article about the rise in foreclosures, and the trouble suddenly heightened the supreme companies. Payments on unstable loans hit overstretched borrowers, declared the Wall Street Journal in August of 2006. Foreclosure figures suggest homeowners in for rocky ride, the journal said a month later. A month after that, Washington Mutual reported that its home loan unit had lost 33 million in the third quarter. HSBC, which had been a major buyer of second-line mortgage, announced huge losses and shut down its pursuits, and on and on. On Main Street, the subprime bubble was grinding to a halt. There was going to be a great deal of pain for both the borrowers and the subprime companies, but Wall Street had one more trick up itself. This was a mechanism created by Wall Street to allow investors to short the housing market, similar to the way investors can bet against stocks. It was a natural development, at least from Wall Street's point of view, but it enveloped into one of the most unnatural and destructive financial products that the world has ever seen, the synthetic CDO. The key ingredient in a synthetic CDO was our old friend the credit default swap. For that matter, the key to shorting the mortgage market was the credit default swap. By 2005, credit default swap on corporate bonds were ubiquitous with a notional value of more than 80 trillion. 80 trillion. They were used by companies to protect against the possibility that another entity it did business with might default. They were used by banks to measure the riskiness of a loan portfolio because their price reflected the market's view of risks, and they were used in the mortgage-backed securities area by CDO underwriters to grab the super senior tranches. The AIG grab, you'll recall, was the key to allowing banks with AAA tranches on their books to reduce their capital. In the corporate bond market, traders were using credit default swap not just as protection against the possibility that a bond they owned might default. They were also using them to make a bet that a company might default even when the trader didn't own the underlying bonds. These credit default swaps had become standardized, meaning that the conditions under which the buyers and sellers got paid were always the same. That the markets tend to involve first comes hedging and then comes speculation. Long before anybody thought to use credit default swap to short mortgage bonds, street firms had taken to combining credit default swaps on a variety of corporate bonds and creating CDOs out of them. They were called synthetic CDOs because the CDOs didn't contain real collateral. Rather they were based on the performance of existing bonds held by someone else. In street parlance, they referenced the real bonds. The gains and losses will be real enough, but the underlying collateral was at one remove, unlike a cash CDO that held collateral, and in which all the inventors were long and got their payments from the underlying corporate bonds. A synthetic CDO could work only if there were inventors on both the long side and the short side of every tranche. To put in another way, each position required two counterparties. Those who were long got cash flows that mimicked those of the underlying bonds, while those who were short paid a fee for the swap protection, but got the right to a big payoff should enough companies default on their debts. As ever, the cash flows were carved into tranches that were rated all the way from AAA to young. By 2005, the hot new thing in the market was correlation trading, going long one tranche, maybe AAA, while shorting another tranche, the BBB, say. It was driven by demand by inventors for a particular slice of risks and models that purported to show what the spread of the difference in price between various tranches should be. It also allowed firms to make these correlation trades with immense leverage because their models told them that the trades balance out and therefore carry little risk. Remember 2004 when the SEC allowed Wall Street firms to use their own models to calculate the amount of capital they had to hold. Here, here was the consequence of that decision, because the models for correlation trading say they were near rigless traders. The firms didn't have to put much capital against those traders. It was like long-term capital management on steroids. steroids. In the spring of 2005, a warning shot was fired about the dangers of this brave new world when the credit rating agencies unexpectedly downgraded the debt of General Motors and Ford. All the models went higher. Press reports speculate that some hedge fund and some Wall Street banks had lost huge sums that made investment the dealers. Tickets ran an article entitled "The Synthetic CDO Sell Game," called the hottest market in all of fixed income via disaster in the making. It noted ominously that many players in the market weren't